Hi, everybody. Welcome back. This is the Texas Meetup Group, and today we are going to take on the topic of difficult poetry. And after we talk a little bit about the concept of difficult poetry and what it means to each of us, we're going to talk about Caroline Bergvall's Say Parsley. And so with that, I'm going to pass the mic to Alana.
Hi, I think difficult poetry is an opportunity. I call it connection poetry, where you're going to a party and you can go in the windows or the doors, you can go in all kinds of ways, but the important thing is that you have a party, you have people to work with. So it's connection poetry.
Yeah. So it's not difficult, right? The word difficult might be a turnoff for some people. And so we'd like you to try to consider looking beyond the word difficult and trying to grapple with what it might actually mean to be difficult poetry. How about you, Terry R?
Well, I like to call it open poetry because I had to learn that lesson when I came to ModPo about openness. I am an accountant by trade, so I'm used to being black and white. And at first I was very interested in finding out what the answer was, so I could see if I got the answer myself correctly. And that ain't ModPo. So I learned that poetry is very different from accounting. And I just want everyone to feel the wonder of that change in your life that I had. I love our discussions.
Lisa, how about you? What are you thinking about difficult poetry?
I like to call it interactive poetry because I like to interact, who I am interacting with the poem on the page, and that may change the first time I read it from the 10th time I read it. And also with ModPo, it's so great because you interact with all these other great minds and how they're interacting with the poem, and you can learn and be have your mind go curious of what I say, so poetry.
All right. How about you, Terry Talty?
Yeah, I like both the open and the connective. I mean, all three of those, and the interactive, because that does mean that the reader is part of it. It's a participant. The reader kind of makes the poem themselves, each reader. But I'm going to suggest that I like the term that Denny, Nicholas Stern, one of our ModPo friends, came up with, to call it mutt poetry, because he said nothing new comes from nowhere. So there's always some kind of sources. You don't know who it is, what, was it a golden setter and a pug or what? But we create this poetry for today that is from such a variety of sources, and it's not elitist because it's a mutt, and it's free.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Mutt poetry, so it's mixed up, it's heterogeneous. I like that a lot. For me, the word difficult poetry is actually pretty inviting. Like, as a person who enjoys difficult puzzles and challenges and things, I really, when I learned about it, I thought, what is that all about? I really want to get my heels in there and try to make sense of this stuff. And as I've iterated on ModPo myself, or just poetry in general, even beyond just ModPo, it's provided me with a lot of flexibility, right? Like, I've learned to be more flexible with my mind. I feel like a little bit more like a mental gymnast when I approach poetry now than I did when I first joined ModPo and learned about poetry. And so for me, it's been a pleasure. And I think, labeling it as difficult poetry is important. It's kind of like, that gives you kind of a signal that this might not be, a rhyming couplet that you're reading. This might be something that you're not familiar with, or poetry. It makes people question, what is poetry, right? It sort of brings you in and says, is this really poetry? And what's so cool about that is that it is poetry, right? Like, so when you start to work your way through that and realize that even if you are doing something totally radical and totally different, it is poetry nonetheless. And I think that's pretty awesome. Any other comments about difficult poetry before we kind of shift towards talking about Caroline Bergvall's Say Parsley?
Well, I should have mentioned that Dave Bender, one of our ModPoers, suggested that we could call difficult poetry alternatively posals. I thought that was pretty fun because
pretty cool.
That's
These
Texas.
certainly
That's
be
Texas.
puzzles.
Yeah, I really like that. So yeah, like the idea of it being a poem puzzle. I love it.
Yeah.
Very cool.